We're here today to talk about retirement, and specifically if you can afford to retire and stay retired the way you want. Do you have confidence in your financial future? So I'm going to start with kind of the basics of what you need to shape a sound retirement. And it's going to sound very fundamental, but if we all did it, I think our chances for success would be greatly improved. You need to make the most of the things that you have control of, while still being aware of those things that you don't have total control or those things that you have absolutely no control over. Still need to be aware of those, but you need to take advantage of those things that you have complete control over. Now let's think of an example or two of things that we have complete control over. How about your savings rate? The amount of money that you save. You dictate how much you're going to save each and every time you open the bank account. Or if you have a company retirement plan, how much are you going to put away? How about your asset allocation model? How you invest your account? There are also some things that you have some control over, like your spending rate, how much you're going to spend. Now you may not have total control because certainly we all have fixed expenses and we have variable expenses. So we may have a little more control over the variable, but we do have some control over how much we spend. We also have perhaps some control over our employment earnings and the duration of our employment. I can tell you many times we sit with folks and look at schedules that tell them whether or not they can retire comfortably, and if they make one adjustment and say, instead of retiring in 2 years, what if I retire in 4 years? And it's incredible how different the landscape can look if you just make that one slight adjustment. Also, we have some control over our own longevity, how long we're going to live. None of us know exactly when we're going to die, but we can choose lifestyle things that might increase our chances of living a longer life. Then lastly, there are some things that we have absolutely no control over at all. Those things include the returns that the markets give us. We can't control that, yet we tend to spend an awful lot of time concerning ourselves with that, but we have no control over it. Also, policy regarding taxation or savings allowances. We don't have any control over that either, but yet we still ought to be aware of it. And an example would be, you don't have any control over how much you're allowed to put into a company retirement plan, but you should be aware of what those contribution levels are and then take advantage of those contribution levels when given the opportunity. So we're going to talk about retirement and if you can afford to retire with that as kind of a backdrop. We're going to think about tomorrow today. And I say that, and I think people immediately understand it, but I'll use an example to help get us going. If you think about the last time you planned a vacation, how much time did you spend thinking about the destination, where you were going to go? Pick the right spot, pick the right hotel, make the dinner reservations, do all of the things that are fun to do when you're planning a vacation. And if you think about the amount of time that you spent planning that vacation, it was probably a decent bit. Now think about how much time you've spent planning for your own retirement. Probably not as much, probably because it doesn't sound like it's as much fun. But if you think about that for a moment, for many of us, retirement is going to be a 20 or a 30-year vacation. So we ought to spend some time today thinking about our retirement tomorrow. We hope that we can give you some assistance with the realization of your life's goals, figuring out exactly what they are and how to accomplish those. We think it's best done through a planning process that takes out a lot of the guesswork that's involved. We're going to talk about some of the steps to financial success, the 8 principles of financial management, and we'll go through each of those and see how it impacts us as we start to plan for retirement. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about goals and how important goals are. Lots of different companies and universities do studies on goals. We happen to have one from the Dominican University of California, where they conducted a study on written goals back a little over a decade ago. And they had about 150 participants, and they asked those folks to state their goals and track their progress. And what they found was that the folks who had written down their goals and shared those goals with someone else, they were over 33% more successful in accomplishing their stated goals. So having goals is important. Writing them down, making them real and tangible is even more important. Even when we do get our goals written down, success is not a guarantee. If we take a look at some of the most common goals that we all have as Americans, after health, the most common concern for the average American is retirement security. And if we take a look at some of these income numbers, you'll see that the median annual income for Americans age 65 and over, and this is including Social Security benefits. For men, it's just over $31,000, for women, just over $18,000, and for families, just over $58,000. If you believe that Social Security will play a main role in your own income, we would suggest that it might be a portion of your retirement income, but you shouldn't count on Social Security being the largest piece of your retirement income. In fact, if you take a look at the average Social Security benefit during 2018, for men, it was just over $18,700 per year, and for women, it was just shy of $15,000 per year. That probably isn't going to allow you, that alone won't allow you to live the retirement that you want, but it would be a portion of your overall retirement income. The 6 steps to what we believe will help you become financially successful include starts with determining what your goals are and writing them down. You then have to analyze where you are and where you want to be. Then you have to design a plan that's going to help you accomplish the goals that you have stated. Next, we have to implement the plan and then monitor and adjust. That doesn't mean that you have to tear it up every time there's a market hiccup, but you do have to monitor and adjust as needed as your goals and objectives change and as things change in the economy. And then lastly, you have to continue to educate yourself. Now, we said that you need to get your goals in place, you need to analyze where you are, and you need to design a plan. After you've done that, and up until that point, you've done a lot of good work. But if you don't take the next step, number 4, and implement the plan, then we've done a lot of good academic stuff, but it isn't going to lead anywhere. So we need to take step number 4 and implement the plan. And then, as I said, monitor and adjust as needed. And then finally, continue to educate yourself and make sure you're on track. So now let's take a look at some of the principles of financial management. And I've been in the financial industry for over 25 years, and a lot of times people who don't know that I've been in the industry for 25 years, when they find out, they'll ask me what the secrets are in the financial industry. And I tell them, well, that's the thing, there are no secrets. That's the great secret of financial success. It's that there aren't any secrets. There really, truly are only proven textbook principles. Principles that are in the textbook for a reason they tend to work. We're going to talk about those principles today. In fact, we're going to touch on 8 of the principles of financial management, starting with inflation, and then we'll talk about taxes, rates of return, risk, time, not timing. We don't believe anyone can consistently time the markets, and we'll see how that can be a really dangerous game to play. Diversification, balance, and asset allocation. So we're going to start talking about inflation. And when I say inflation, I think everyone truly understands what inflation means. But I think when we hear inflation, we immediately think to big, double-digit, scary type inflation. And that isn't the inflation that we need to be overly concerned with. We should be much more concerned with core, basic inflation. And if you take a look at the chart that's on the screen, you're going to see that average inflation from 1926 through 2018 has averaged just about 3%. Now you can see during that period there were some deflationary periods during some war times. If we remove some of the world wars and just look at inflation post-World War II, inflation has averaged something closer to 4%. It is that 3 to 4% inflation that we need to concern ourselves with, especially when we're dealing with our investment portfolio. Because if we're not earning a rate of return that is at least in keeping with inflation, then we're falling behind. We also need to understand our tax bracket, because in addition to outpacing inflation, we need to pay taxes. And after taxes and inflation, if you don't have a positive rate of return on your investments, now you're getting behind. So you need to understand what your total gross income is. After your adjustments, you get your adjusted gross income. And then from that, you subtract your deductions and exemptions, and that will get you your net taxable income. That net taxable income, that's the figure that we reference in the tax tables, and it determines the taxes that are owed on your tax bracket. Staying with taxes, we also should understand the rates that we pay on long-term capital gains. There are 2 types of capital gains that we might pay tax on. The first would be a short-term capital gain. And let me define short-term. That's simply a security that you have owned for 12 months or less. So if you bought something, owned it for less than a year, and sold it at a gain, you would pay short-term capital gains, and that's whatever your income tax bracket is in that year. That's what your short-term gain is. Long-term capital gains are 12 months or longer securities that have been held. And if you've held a security for longer than 12 months, you would pay a long-term capital gain. And if you look at the chart that's on the screen, you'll see that if you, and I'm just going to use the middle column to make it easier, but if you use the married filing joint return and you have an income between 0 and $78,750, you don't have a long-term capital gain rate. If you earn between $78,750 and $488,850, you are going to pay a 15% capital gains rate. Anything over $488,850, you pay a 20% capital gain rate. By the way, you'll also notice there's this thing called net investment income tax of 3.8%, and that would apply for incomes over those levels. There's an additional net investment income tax for the higher income earners. Now, capital gains rates, this is one of those things that we should be aware of, even though we don't have control over what they do with capital gains rates. But it is something that folks hear during political season. So politicians talk about and make adjustments to the capital gains rates on a pretty regular basis. So while it's not something that you can impact, it is something that will have an impact on your investments. So you need to be aware of it. We should also talk about rates of return. When we teach this course at local universities and corporations, I usually do a survey here and I ask people to tell me what rate of return they would prefer. And I give them a return of 1 or 2%, a return of 5, and then a return of 10. And of course, everybody wants the 10% rate of return. Then we talk about what's required to get that return and the risk that's involved. And suddenly they think, okay, maybe I don't want that 10% rate of return. What rate of return do we want? Well, let's first take a look at some of the historical rates of return. Let's look at the historical rate of return on money market and short-term CDs. This goes back again to 1946, and you can see those short-term money markets and CDs averaged 1.46%. Bonds and longer-term CDs averaged a little better than 5%, and stocks averaged a little better than 10%, almost 11%. And when we look at that, we might immediately think, well, that 1.46% rate of return seems safe. But is it safe or is it merely guaranteed? Because those two concepts are very different, and we'll talk about those a bit more. The 10.8% rate of return seems risky, right? But let's think back to what we just talked about a moment ago, inflation and taxation. If inflation is averaging somewhere between 3 and 4, and then we have to tack on another % or so for taxes, if we're not earning something over that 4 to 5% rate, now we're falling behind. So we need to understand the risks that are associated with both investing and not earning a rate of return that gives us enough to outpace both inflation and taxation. We also need to understand volatility and the several factors that may influence the impact of volatility. I'm going to start first with life events. There's nothing that says you may need access to funds at an inopportune time. When we talk to folks, if you look at the long-term graphs and you say, okay, well, I know that stocks over the long term give me the greatest return, so I want to put all of my money into stocks. And then we talk about some of the reasons that you may not want to do that, and the most shining reason is you don't want to take on the kind of volatility that being in stocks alone presents. While they may give us the greatest return, they also have the most volatility. So if you have your money in equities and we go through a downturn in the market, and then something happens in your life that requires you to get at that money, what have you done? You've taken a bad situation and made it worse. We put our money in the equity market, it went down, then we needed to tap into it. So you don't want to set yourself up for that kind of potential downturn. Also, human nature. Human nature is interesting. We all tend to believe that whatever is happening at this moment in time is the way things are going to be indefinitely. And I said earlier that I've been doing this for over 25 years. I've seen market cycles, both good market cycles and very difficult market cycles, and I'll take you back through two of those to illustrate the point. In the mid to late 90s, we had something called a tech boom, where everybody was looking at these tech stocks and the tech markets were running wild, and the markets did really, really well year after year. People thought at that point in time that there was a new paradigm, that the markets were different, that this was the new reality, and that markets were going to continue to give us these types of massive double-digit returns year after year after year. Well, then, of course, the year 2000 through 2002 came along and reminded people that markets go down as well as up. And we tend to learn that lesson on a pretty regular basis every several years. So we also had a period in 2008 where the market was very difficult. At that point in time, the same people who thought back in the mid to late 90s that markets would only go up, in 2008, we all thought, well, now markets are going to go down forever and ever. And that's not the case. But it is human nature to think whatever's happening at the moment is going to continue to happen indefinitely. And then finally, the volatility of results and the impact it has on whether or not you can accomplish the goals and objectives that you've set up. If we take a look at this chart now, all that we've done is we've plotted the return of the stock market, the bond market, and then a balanced portfolio made up of both stocks and bonds. And you can see the stocks that are represented there by the blue circle, they've returned right around 11% long term. Bonds, about half that, 5% to 6%. And then you can see the balanced portfolio is, as you might have expected, right in the middle, right in between the returns of stocks and bonds. We do this to illustrate the fact that you need to seek the return that's required to achieve your objectives. Striving for more return could increase your risk unnecessarily. We're out of time for today, but please join us next time when we will continue our discussion about being ready and prepared for a successful retirement. You can reach out to us at any time. The locations include Bethel Park, Wexford, downtown, and Beaver. Thank you for joining us for this session on being financially prepared for retirement.